There's something very romantic about discovering lost artifacts, unearthing secrets the ground has held for long periods of time. For me, archaeological digs are very fascinating, and I'd love to take part in one. Maybe find some undiscovered civilization. And until that happens, I'll keep watching movies about the topic. This time, it's the Netflix original The Dig that stars Carey Mulligan and Ralph Fiennes. This is telling the story of how an archaeologist embarks on the historically significant excavation of Sutton Hoo in the late 1930s. Carey Mulligan plays Mrs. Pretty, a fairly wealthy widow who has some large mounds on her property. She hires the archaeologist Basil Brown, played by Ralph Fiennes, but he'd refer to himself as an excavator. They play their parts really well. Mrs. Pretty is proper, but not stuffy. She's raising her young son on their large estate, and she's kind, but she's not a wilting flower. I mean, she's strong and determined, and she's not going to be bullied by anybody. Basil is quiet and kind. He's also wildly intelligent. He's a voracious reader and has a ton of knowledge on all kinds of civilizations and history. Plus, he walks around chuffing on his pipe, so you know he's a thinker. I really like the dynamic between Mrs. Pretty and Basil. They're kind, but not overly friendly. But it is nice to watch the relationship grow as time progresses. They both deliver understated performances, but execute them really well. Much of the way this story is told may take a few moments to get used to. It feels like it jumps around quite a bit. And that's because the movie employs a non-linear visual storytelling style. And I'm not talking about something like Tarantino would use, though. A scene will start with one visual, then transition to something else, which usually was before in time than what is being first shown, and then transitions back. I mean, it kind of like a bookending of a scene from earlier in the story, but one where we're just seeing it for the first time. And it does this repeatedly throughout the movie. It takes some getting used to, but it's not a negative. I mean, in fact, I began to really enjoy the uniqueness. Another thing that might take some getting used to is that scenes overlap. We have audio from one scene, but visuals from another, or several. I mean, it's kind of like narration, but it's not a narration. It truly is audio from the scene covering a mix of other scenes. So, for example, the setting is really beautiful. The countryside that Mrs. Pretty owns is sweeping and green and very serene, and the mounds provide a bit of mystique, at least at the beginning. So because of the non-linear storytelling, it may feel a bit choppy. And there was some choppiness to it, but it didn't come from the non-linear portion. It's more from some time jumps that are indeterminate in length. All we know is that progress on the dig is moving forward and discoveries are being made. And as the story progresses and the dig becomes more intriguing, our cast grows. Ben Chaplin and Lily James come into the story as a married couple joining the excavation. Their addition to the story may be true, but for the narrative that's playing out, they seemed like a bit of a distraction. I got the sense that the screenwriter didn't feel that the archaeological discoveries were enough of a draw to hold people's attentions, so they had to just up the drama with some complicated relationships. All the while the dig is going on, Mrs. Pretty's brother has come to stay. But he's really only waiting to be called up by the RAF in preparation for England joining in World War II. And there's a lot to this that feels kind of thrown about. I mean, characters or situations tossed in at random times to supposedly add intrigue or romance, but really just distraction from the archaeological dig and the story of Mrs. Pretty and Basil. I think I'd classify their relationship as a platonic love story, one of mutual respect and care. I mean, Basil is much older than Mrs. Pretty, and he's also married. And while we get the sense of some closeness that comes between them, he's always a gentleman. There is some drama that involves the dig and the politics that come from different museums vying for the right to claim whatever may be found. And I enjoyed some of that. It added some offbeat humor and some wit, and a lot of it came from Mrs. Pretty. But the other portions, the arrival of the married archaeologist couple, the brother waiting to be called to the RAF, it just took the focus away from the story of the discovery of Sutton Hoo. And frustratingly, they don't even give us a big amount of the dig in a movie called The Dig. Yeah, I mean, we do get to see some of the work that goes in and some of the unearthing of stuff, but it just didn't seem enough for me. I think if they had focused on Mrs. Pretty and Basil, even keeping in the politics and the scheming by the competing museums, but they ditched those sideways stories, this would have been very gripping and engaging, especially with the different feel of the transitions and the non-linear storytelling. So all in all, this is an enjoyable story. I think it could have gone deeper in detail regarding the dig itself and the findings, but I was still somewhat satisfied with what I got. I absolutely loved, though, Carey Mulligan and Ralph Fiennes. They give very emotional but reserved performances and complemented each other really well on screen. It's just under 2 hours, and the only times I really felt the length was when some of the secondary storylines would take prominence. There's sex, brief nudity, some profanity, and not really any violence. I give The Dig 3.5 out of 5 couches. So if you could go on an archaeological dig, where would you want to go? I just undertook a dig of my own. I mean, we had a massive storm here in Northern California, and all of my fence blew down. So I got to dig new holes. But that wasn't fun or satisfying. I'd rather go to Saqqara in Egypt or maybe down to Central America to explore. But let me know your choice of destination in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.